Welcome to Marin Voices and Views. With Lawrence A. Strick, I'm Peter B. Collins. In our second segment today, we'll talk about the risk of flooding in the Ross Valley with Lise Stampfli Torme, President of the Flood Mitigation League of Ross Valley.
First, Peter, I want to welcome Richard Benson, who just completed his first 2 years as Marin County's Assessor, Recorder, and Clerk. Mr. Benson joined the assessor's office in 1985 and worked his way up to the number 2 spot. When Joan Thayer retired in 2010, he was elected to his current position, which at that time added some responsibilities, that being the assessor's office?
The county clerk.
The clerk's office. And Mr. Benson's going to tell us what the clerk is and the assessor is and what he does. But first, let me ask you, now that you've been in the job for 2 years, is it what you thought it would be, and how's it going?
Thanks, Larry, and thank you, Peter, for having me here today. The job's great. You know, I've been in the office for 27 years, so well versed in what I could expect going into this role as Assessor, Recorder, County Clerk. So it's been very enjoyable, and it's not something that's new to me in terms of what I might have expected. As you know, the assessor is responsible for assessing all the property in the county that's locally accessible. And the recorder is basically our county archivist who records documents, everything from deeds to notices that people want to record and make part of the public record. And the county clerk, which we recently added in the last couple of years, they keep track of fictitious business names, certain licensing, and perform wedding ceremonies for civil weddings. Those are some of the biggest responsibilities of the county clerk. So I'm glad to be here and look forward to our little conversation today.
So how does this measure up to what you expected from the political campaign that led to your election 2 years ago?
Well, I think what we see in terms of my role and what my expectations were in getting the job, those are some of the things that we've already been accomplishing in our office. For example, we've conducted training across the state of California, both for our office locally and assessors' offices across the state. We continue to do that. I've been chair of the education committee for the California Assessors Association, and we've been doing very active in that role. We've been integrating new systems into our assessor's office, as well as the recorder's office, where we've recently integrated a new archiving system to update microfilm images into digital images for about 50 years of records, which is a big thing. In the county clerk's office, we've been continuing with the programs that we've had there, but we're looking forward to things that might be new, like what might happen with same-sex marriages, and what the U.S. Supreme Court may do as we move forward.
I would think that many of the folks in Marin, and they look at your 3 jobs, are focusing in on the assessor's office, and that's the guy who's collecting the taxes. Is that right?
Not quite.
No?
The tax collector collects the taxes, but the assessor determines the value from which the taxes are founded.
And with that in mind, how would you view the real estate market in Marin today? And is it stabilized? Is it going forward? And what, as you look at it from your perspective, what would you tell the folks here in Marin?
Well, as you know, in 2007, at the end of 2007, we just had a huge collapse of the real estate market. And after that, the real estate market's been relatively flat. And that's perhaps changing now as we look forward to some revival in the economy, both in terms of the general economic situation and the housing market. We've also seen a reduction in the number of foreclosures and short sales that have been happening. Those notices and deeds that are recorded are getting fewer and fewer. So the housing market, the equation on supply and demand is changing now as we move forward.
Now, when you reference foreclosures, one of the things that has reduced the amount of housing inventory that's on the market is purchases by equity funds and other investor groups. Have we seen that in Marin the way it's been reported, for example, in some of the counties that were hit harder with the downturn, like Sacramento, like San Joaquin, Stockton area?
You know, I think the biggest thing you see in Marin County in terms of investors, since we're a small county and the properties that we have in Marin County are small in nature in general. They're not huge subdivisions where somebody might come in and buy hundreds of homes that have been foreclosed on. I think the investment market we see in Marin County is a smaller nature where people who might be interested in investing in real estate, maybe the opportunity to buy low and return some income from the real estate, whereas the income opportunities in the market from CDs and other interest-bearing instruments might be actually less than what you could return from a real estate investment. And I think on a smaller basis that we see that in some level in Marin.
Mm-hmm.
Are we in a position now where the people who own homes here are going to see adjustments in their assessments one way or another, or is it coming back to the levels that they were in before the crash of the market, and how would that affect us?
Larry, that's a great question. It's really important to taxpayers in Marin County to have an understanding about Proposition 13 and how it works in this kind of economic climate. What we experienced at the end of 2007 and the beginning of 2008, which we call the lien date, was a pretty substantial reduction in values of properties that were purchased in the 5 or 10 years even before that date. And those reductions could be anywhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 35%. So the way Proposition 13 works in a normal environment, it allows that assessment to increase by no more than 2% every year, and that would go on kind of perpetually, so to speak, in that kind of climate. But when we see the market adjusted because we've reduced the value of those properties and the economy starts to recover, then those assessments could go up by more than 2% a year based upon whatever's happening in the marketplace. So for example, if a property owner had their property reduced by 20% and then the economy began to recover and the value of homes in the real estate market went up 10% in 1 year, it appreciated 10%, it's conceivable that that assessment and the taxes could go up 10% that year. The marketplace doesn't really expect a recovery on that magnitude right now. We're still in this kind of slow recovery perspective, but that is probably more likely to occur in the nearer future than the lapse of time that we had for 4 years since 2007.
So, well, let me just follow up for a second on that. So it is possible that someone who had purchased their house for $1 million and it was reassessed at $750,000 would have seen a reduction of significantly greater than 2% in their tax bill.
Exactly.
Now, if the house goes back up to $1 million or $1,100,000, they're going to recapture they're going to get an increase in their tax bill all the way to there, and that could be more than 2%.
That's correct, but it's not retroactive. It would only be moving forward, and that means that it would return to their original, let's say, indexed purchase price or base year, and that would again start this cycle of going up 2% a year.
So if that happens to you, you could raise an eyebrow, but it's probably correct in the billing.
Well, it's an opportunity to look and check, and if people have questions, they can always check with our office, but it's something to plan on, because as the market begins to change and we see news in the newspapers and so forth saying that the real estate market is picking up, then that's a good time to start thinking, my tax bill might be going up and I ought to think about that and prepare.
So let's use this example of a hypothetical $1 million property, and it declined in value during the downturn to $750. That's just the example we'll use. Then at what rate will it climb back up to $1 million or higher? You used the figure of 10%, but that's not a cap, right? It's really driven by the actual market activity.
Absolutely correct. Whatever the market does. So if the market went up 4%, it might go up 4%. If it went up 20, it might go up 20. Back before 2007, as we were in that escalating, appreciating real estate market, it was not unusual to see the whole assessment roll going up 7, 8, 9, 10% a year for all properties. So we were seeing properties going up at a rate of 15 or even 20% a year in some cases during that height of the market. That's not likely to occur as we look forward from where we stand today, but from a technical standpoint, could that happen in terms of the rules? Yes.
And Rich, just to stay with us for a minute, how many property owners in Marin did get some sort of a reduction in their assessed value over the last 4 years?
Yeah, it's good. Another good question. We have about 100,000 parcels in Marin County, more or less. And of those 100,000 parcels, we have about 22,000 today that are in this reduced state. So between 20 and 25%, 22% in that state, a large number of our properties. It also represents, interestingly enough, in terms of the fiscal perspective of the county, that those properties are also the ones that were purchased at the highest value in the marketplace. So they carry the highest, let's say, weight of value compared to ones that were on the assessment roll that may have been purchased in the 70s or 80s.
And that's not a new law. That was the law going into the dip in the market and the law
Absolutely.
coming out of the dip in the market.
Absolutely. It's been the law since 1978.
Which brings up another question. What can we expect in terms of new laws in 2003? Is there anything we need to know?
So for 2012, 2013, not too many. The important thing is that we see coming down the horizon again things that could affect the assessor, recorder, or county clerk, possibility of same-sex marriages in the county clerk, and there's one law that may be attractive to people, which has to do with persons that are individuals living in a home who've been in the home for a year, cohabitate that home, it's their principal place of residence, one dies, they're unrelated as opposed to, let's say, spouses or parents and children, and they want to pass that property to their partner or their cohabitant, they can do that without being reassessed. That's a new law that begins January 1, 2013.
And Rich,
That's upon a death, I'm sorry.
we have about 2 minutes remaining here. I wanted to ask a little bit, because your work in all three areas is so data intensive, and the county tried to move to a new computer system a few years ago. It was a big flop, and I don't want to litigate that or raise those issues, but what is the competency in terms of the IT that is available for the three functions that your office performs?
Well, I think we're really fortunate. The functions that the assessor relies on are very, very stable. Our assessment role, the assessment roles, be it the unsecured and the secure, are very well entrenched in systems that are very stable and have been that way for decades. We don't expect that to change. Some of the things we do expect to change are some of our smaller standalone systems will be integrated into more sophisticated systems, and the possibility that we might develop new systems to deal with these 22,000 properties in a decline status. So we're looking forward to those opportunities. We have a brand new IST director in Marin, and I spoke with him today, so I think we have some opportunity as we move forward.
And overall, you feel pretty comfortable about the management of your department? Don't have any reporters sniffing around looking for dirt?
We have a new assistant, in fact, two new assistant assessors in the office, one to replace my old position and one that's a different position. And I have the greatest confidence as we move forward. We've got a great staff.
Great. Richard Benson is Marin County's assessor, recorder, and county clerk. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
We're joined now by Lise Stampfli Torme. Lise teaches journalism and design at Dominican University, and she and I have worked together on some local political campaigns. She's a longtime resident of San Anselmo and has been very active on the risks and impacts of flooding in the Ross Valley. She is founder and president of the Flood Mitigation League of Ross Valley. Lise, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Peter.
Just past December 2nd, on a Sunday morning, we had back-to-back Pacific storms, those Pineapple Expresses with lots of rain, and the creek water levels in San Anselmo rose to within 6 inches of flood stage, and at that point alarms were sounded. This was a very close call, and you published an op-ed in the Marin IJ that urged officials to trigger the alarms earlier. Tell us about that and what water level you think should cause those alarms to go off.
Well, Peter, it did come within very close to flooding to downtown San Anselmo. But in my neighborhood, and I live at 38 Morningside Drive, which is just off Broadmoor, it actually did flood. And our creek did jump its banks. The stormwaters entered, backed up into our street in front of our house, and there they met 30,000 gallons of sewage delivered from broken pipes, which are under the purview of the Ross Valley Sanitation District. So we actually did overtop, and we did have some flooding. Though my home escaped at this time, my neighbors' garages were filled with stormwater and effluent.
And who actually makes the decision to trigger the alarm, and is there an established set of criteria?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I have attended many public hearings on all aspects of flooding and flood mitigation and warning, and I've never heard of a policy established around a single, this is what should happen when, and these are the metrics that we use. But I certainly think it's time for the county Office of Emergency Services to sit down with the communities and come up with a solution. Flooding in this area, and the problem of flooding in this area, is made more difficult because there are so many agencies and towns and utility districts in the county, and then of course there's the state and the federal too that need to play a part. So all of this makes it more difficult, but it's time to really come down to the table and work out an effective warning system that will work.
Now, we've also, merged some of the firefighters in the area, and San Anselmo, Fairfax, and the Twin Cities are merging police departments. Is that a good thing where there's central command, in your opinion?
It could be.
Or are people, for example, from Twin Cities not so aware of the issues in the Ross Valley?
It could be. It could be. And in the past, we have enjoyed different levels of warning coming in earlier, and we've been able to do something to protect our properties. But this time, of course, it didn't come. And of course, it didn't flood in downtown San Anselmo, but it did flood in my neighborhood. So we've got to do more. We've got to go back and revisit what did work and how to make it better.
And you've been at this, or viewing this, going back to New Year's Day 2006, is my understanding. And at that point, there was a flood in San Anselmo that caused millions of dollars worth of damage. You led a campaign to pass a flood damage fee that was successful. That work, the repairs for that, is just getting on the way now, started now. How would you describe that process? Has it met your expectations, or has it been caught up in some of the other problems that you're describing that are still going on?
Great question. Great question. But I want to start with a couple of corrections first. 2005 was not our first event. These events go back to the early 1900s and beyond, because that whole area down near Kentfield was wetland, and it was a tidal wetland as well. But I moved to Marin County in December of 1982, and of course we had an enormous flood. The super flood happened then, and we were 18 inches deep in water in our home in that area. So our problem is basically that we're not just hit occasionally, we're hit frequently by these 100-year storm events that just deliver a lot of water to the area. So help me out with this question again. Remind me where I am.
So then, bringing it historically to 2006, the waters come again, big time flood. As an activist, you see to it that a fee is imposed to help get remedial repairs. The repairs are just getting started now, and I'm asking you to describe how that process was, and do you see it being efficient, and is it going forward, or are we stuck?
We're a long way away from breaking ground on the repairs, a long way. We were held up in the courts because of the Ford Green lawsuit, which challenged the result of the flood drainage fee election. But we did get that passed. And since 2005, under the leadership of Hal Brown, that went forward. Got our flood fee. It was appealed up to the Supreme Court. The monies have been collected. They're being held. and planning is moving forward. But I want to make it very clear that all that has been done to date is planning and an incidental cleaning of the creek, but not even a thorough scouring or a working of the creek to remove obstructions that can, of course, hold debris back and create dams and create more flooding. So, and they can't even do the aggressive creek work, which would involve tree removal and banks and stuff, until the whole environmental report is done and certified. And we anticipate that some of this stuff will come into a head in planning in the next couple of years. But honestly, breaking ground on these projects like the detention basins, which are going to be big fixes for us, 2018 or beyond.
And you're concerned that there's going to be a couple of 100-year floods in the interim? Is that what
You got it.
That's what I'm hearing here.
You got it, exactly. We really only have our sandbags, whatever fixes we can make to our personal properties, and whatever arrangements we can make to protect our infrastructure or our public buildings. And the thing to remember here is this problem happens over and over and over again, and the costs mount. And the flooding affects all of us. I mean, we have schools that are in the floodplain. We have 2 town halls that are in the floodplain. We have 3 fire stations that are in the floodplain. I mean, we all end up paying for these damages. And then when the businesses get wiped out, it takes a long time for them to come back, and that's lost economic, activity.
So we're roughly 5 years out from the meaningful implementation of the flood mitigation efforts. And this underscores your call for a better warning system, because I happen to have been out of town on December 2nd, but I know just how quickly the water can rise, and that people need additional warnings so that they can be prepared, whether it's sandbags or evacuation or pumps or whatever options are available. Now, in mid-December, the IJ also published an op-ed from Ted Lindquist, a retired police officer, and he's also a sailor. And he talks about the king tides, and we've seen some coverage of that recently. These are unusually high tides, and when they combine with the heavy rainfall and saturated soil, it produces a kind of perfect storm of conditions that can lead to this type of flooding. Do you think that people need a greater awareness of the tides, particularly these high tides that go as high as 7 feet, which is a good 3.5 feet higher than the average?
Well, it's definitely important that we know and educate the public around all the factors that play into this, because then the more the public knows about this, the more they understand what's at stake, not just for themselves. If they live in the floodplain, they get that comfort of knowing what's going on, but even if they don't, their whole community is affected by it. So quite frankly, we just have to have these warnings in place.
Until the big part of the projects are completed and the warning system is worked out, which I suspect you're working on, what can someone who lives or has a business in one of the low-lying areas do to add extra protection for themselves?
Well, in our family, we took out a small business loan, which is a FEMA loan, at a very, very low interest rate. And of course, we had the difficulty of paying it back over time, but we used that money to construct a flood wall around our home and to put in flood gates. But we can no longer leave town during these storm events or during the worst part of the winter. No more skiing, because we have to be there to put the pumps in place and to install the gates. But again, I mean, that's not a great solution either. It's great for our home, and we have to be there to do that. But what we're essentially doing is pushing that water out so it affects someone else. So we really have to fix the drainage systems. And it's a complicated fix because it involves Army Corps of Engineer activity on creating a better flushing system for the tidal prism area, as they call it, down near the bay where the creek meets the bay. We have to do the creek fixes, and the detention basin plan is the biggest part, because if these get going and they get approved, it will hold storm waters back during critical moments. So when these high tides come up, the stormwaters can be held back.
If folks have the appetite to work on this project collectively, and it looks like you need a systemic fix, where do they go? Are there meetings? Are there groups? How do you get involved so that you can get an understanding of what to do in your area?
Well, I've had 3 calls just this week from people and had 3 very good conversations with folks about this. And our group does hold yearly and bi-yearly meetings. When things have been really crunchy around the flood fee, we held them every month. And we invite people to come. Also, Flood Zone 9 maintains a website where the county has very good information online. I don't have the URL with me, but it's Flood Zone 9 and County of Marin. But they will have information posted regularly. They also have regular meetings, maybe once a year, when major planning issues come through, where they roll out their plan to the public, and they have charts and maps and experts there to talk to, and we urge people to come. Our group reaches out to our list, which is about 350 people in homes and businesses in the area, and we say, come to this meeting. This is important.
Well, Lise, thank you for raising awareness about these important issues. Lise Stampfli Torme is president of the Flood Mitigation League of the Ross Valley.
Peter, we could get that website and we'll put it on the show.
Great. Thank you.